I have been on this bench for 39 years. I have seen this courtroom fill with every kind of human story this city has ever produced. I have seen greed and desperation and courage and cowardice and love so fierce it made hardened attorneys look away. I have seen all of it. I have thought about all of it. I have carried pieces of all of it home with me every evening for 39 years. But there are mornings that are different from other mornings. Mornings that do not feel like cases. Mornings that feel like something heavier and more important than anything a legal file can contain. Mornings where you look at the person standing in front of you and you understand immediately that what is at stake is not money or property or procedure. What is at stake is the entire meaning of a life. On a Monday morning in February, a man named Walter Kowalski walked into my courtroom. He was 78 years old. He walked slowly, with a cane, each step deliberate and careful, the way a person walks when their body has started to cost them more than it used to. He was wearing a brown cardigan over a collared shirt, the collar pressed flat and even, and his shoes were old but polished to a shine that told me everything I needed to know about who he was before he said a single word. He sat down in the defendant's chair and he placed both hands on the table in front of him, and he looked at me with eyes that were tired and clear at the same time. Not the tiredness of someone who has given up, the tiredness of someone who has been fighting for a very long time and is not sure how much fight they have left, but has shown up anyway, because showing up is what you do. My name is Judge Judy Sheindlin. This is the story of Walter Kowalski, and this is the most important morning I have had on this bench in 39 years. Walter Kowalski had lived in the same house for 41 years, a two-bedroom house on Elmwood Street in a neighborhood that had changed around it 3 times over 4 decades, while the house itself remained exactly what it had always been, his home, the place where he had brought his wife Margaret home from the hospital after their wedding, the place where their daughter Catherine had taken her first steps across the kitchen floor, the place where Margaret had died 11 years ago in the bedroom they had shared for 30 years, and where Walter had sat beside her bed, holding her hand and talking to her softly until the very end. The house was paid off. Walter had made his last mortgage payment 19 years ago. He had stood in the kitchen that morning with the final payment confirmation in his hand, and he had cried, not from sadness, but from the particular relief of a working man who has carried something heavy for a long time and has finally been allowed to set it down. He had called Margaret in from the garden and shown her the paper, and she had held it in both hands and read every word of it twice. And then she had said, "Walter, this house is ours, completely ours." And he had said yes. And they had stood in the kitchen together for a long time without saying anything else because nothing else needed to be said. That is the house the city of Glenwood was trying to take from him over a $900 fine. The fine had originated 18 months earlier. Glenwood had passed a new municipal ordinance requiring all residential properties to have their exterior repainted or resurfaced if the condition fell below a standardized visual rating. An inspector had visited Elmwood Street and had assessed Walter's house as failing the standard due to peeling paint on the rear exterior wall and 2 sections of front trim. Walter had received the citation. He had read it carefully. He had called the number on the citation and spoken to a woman in the municipal office who had explained the fine and the required remediation. Walter had explained that he was 78 years old, that he was undergoing chemotherapy for prostate cancer, that his daughter lived 4 hours away and could not come until spring, and that he intended to address the paint as soon as he was physically able. The woman on the phone had been sympathetic. She had told him to call back when the work was done and they would review the fine. Walter had understood that to mean the fine was on hold pending remediation. What it actually meant, as it turned out, was that the clock kept running regardless of anything said on that phone call. Because municipal fines in Glenwood accrued interest and administrative fees automatically through a computerized system that did not make exceptions for 78-year-old men undergoing chemotherapy. By the time Walter understood what was happening, the $900 fine had become $1,400 with fees and interest. By the time his daughter Catherine had come in April and hired a local handyman to repaint the rear wall and to trim the balance had reached $1,900. Walter had paid $900 of it, everything he had in his checking account at the time, and had written a letter to the municipal office explaining the situation and asking for the remaining balance to be considered in light of his circumstances. The municipal office had sent the remaining balance to a collections agency. The collections agency had filed a lien against the property. The lien had triggered an automatic review under Glenwood's delinquent property ordinance, and under that ordinance, a property with an outstanding municipal lien that remained unresolved after 90 days could be referred for forced sale proceedings. Walter had received the forced sale notice on a Thursday morning. He had read it 3 times. Then he had called Catherine. She had driven 4 hours that same afternoon and found her father sitting at the kitchen table with the notice in front of him and his hands folded on top of it, and a look on his face that she told me later she had never seen before and never wanted to see again. She said he looked like someone who had stopped being surprised by the world and had started being simply, quietly devastated by it. Catherine had filed the court challenge herself. She was a high school history teacher, not an attorney. She had spent 3 evenings researching the process online and had filled out the forms at the kitchen table while her father slept in the next room. She had done it because there was nobody else, and because the alternative was unthinkable, and because her mother had died in that house, and she was not going to let a computerized fine system take it. She was sitting in the second row of my gallery that Monday morning. 46 years old, brown hair pulled back, the same careful posture as her father. The posture of people who have been taught that how you carry yourself when things are hard is a reflection of your character. She was holding a thick folder of documents, organized with colored tabs, the careful preparation of a person who has no legal training but has put everything she has into making sure the right information is in the right order when the moment comes. The city was represented by an attorney named Marcus Webb. He was young, early 30s, and he had the slightly uncomfortable energy of someone who knows the case he has been assigned is not a good one, but has been told to see it through regardless. He arranged his papers with more precision than was necessary for a case of this size, and did not look at Walter directly when he sat down. I opened the file. Walter Kowalski, you are the defendant in a forced sale proceeding initiated by the City of Glenwood relating to an outstanding municipal lien in the amount of $1,000 remaining after partial payment. Do you understand the nature of these proceedings today? Walter said, "Yes, Your Honor," in a voice that was quiet and unhurried. He had the voice of a man who had spent his life saying exactly what he meant and no more. He looked at me steadily. He was not afraid. He was something past afraid, something that had gone through fear and come out the other side into a kind of bare, clear calm. "Mr. Webb, please present the city's position." Marcus Webb stood and laid it out efficiently. Municipal citation issued for property code violation. Fine assessed. Partial payment received. Balance referred to collections. Lien filed per standard procedure. Forced sale triggered under delinquent property ordinance. All steps taken in accordance with established municipal procedure. He sat down. He still did not look at Walter. I looked at the file for a long moment. Then I looked up. "Mr. Webb, how long has Mr. Kowalski lived in this house?" Webb consulted his papers. "The deed shows continuous ownership since 1983, Your Honor." 41 years, I said. "Yes, Your Honor." "And the outstanding balance that triggered this forced sale proceeding. What is it today?" Webb looked at his papers. $1,040, Your Honor, including current accruals. $1,040, I repeated slowly. "On a house that has been paid off for 19 years, on a property owned by a 78-year-old man undergoing cancer treatment." Webb said, "Your Honor, the city's position is that the ordinance applies equally to all properties regardless of the owner's personal circumstances." I turned to look at him directly. I said, "Mr. Webb, I understand what the city's position is. I am asking whether you personally believe that position reflects justice." He paused. "Your Honor, I represent the city's legal interests. It is not my role to make personal judgments about the justice of a given ordinance." I looked at him for a moment. I said, "How old are you, Mr. Webb?" He looked slightly startled. 32, Your Honor." I said, "Do you have parents?" "Yes, Your Honor." I said, "Are they homeowners?" He paused again. "Yes, Your Honor." I said, "I want you to think about your parents for a moment. I want you to think about the home they live in and what it means to them." He did not answer. He did not need to. I turned to Walter. "Mr. Kowalski, tell me about your house." He looked at me. He was quiet for a moment, the thoughtful quiet of someone deciding how to say something that contains more than words can fully hold. He said, "Your Honor, I bought that house in 1983. I was 39 years old. I had saved for 11 years. I worked at the Glenwood Foundry for 22 years. I put every dollar I could spare into that down payment." He paused. "My wife Margaret and I, we painted every room ourselves. We put in the kitchen floor ourselves. When the boiler broke in 91, we fixed it ourselves because we couldn't afford to hire anyone. When the roof needed work, we did what we could and saved until we could do the rest. Every piece of that house, Your Honor, every piece of it has our hands on it somewhere." His voice was steady and even. He was not performing. He was simply reporting facts the way a man reports facts when they are the most important facts of his life. I watched the gallery. People were very still. An older woman 2 rows behind Catherine had her hand pressed flat against her chest. He continued, "Margaret died in that house 11 years ago, in our bedroom. I was with her. I have slept in that bedroom every night since. I am not always well, Your Honor. Some nights are difficult, but I sleep there because it is where she is. Because 40 years of a life together is in those walls." He stopped. He looked at his hands. He said, "I have nowhere else to go. But more than that, I don't want anywhere else. That house is my life." The courtroom was completely silent. Marcus Webb was looking at the table in front of him. Catherine in the second row had both hands pressed together in her lap and was looking at her father with an expression that I recognized immediately because I had seen it before, and it is one of the most specific expressions a human face can make. It is the expression of a child watching a parent be brave. I said, "Mr. Kowalski, you received the original citation and you called the municipal office. Tell me about that conversation." He reached into the folder in front of him, moving slowly, and produced a single sheet of paper. He said, "I wrote down what she told me. Your Honor, I wrote it down while we were talking because I have always written things down." He read from the paper in a careful voice. She said, "Call back when the work is done, and we will review the fine." He looked up. I understood that to mean the fine would wait. I did not understand that it was accruing while we spoke. I turned to Webb. "Is there a record of that call?" Webb said, "The city does not record incoming calls to the municipal office, Your Honor." "Is there a record that a call was made?" Webb consulted his papers. "There is a notation in the file that a call was received from the property owner in the relevant period, Your Honor. One notation, one call, and the advice given on that call, whether intentionally or not, led Mr. Kowalski to believe the timeline was paused while the system continued to run." I leaned forward. "Mr. Webb, a municipal employee, told this man to call back when the work was done and they would review the fine. He understood that to mean the process was paused. That understanding was not unreasonable given the language used. And yet the city continued to accrue fees and interest and ultimately initiated forced sale proceedings on a paid-off home owned by a 78-year-old man with cancer over a balance that began at $900. Is that what happened?" Webb said, "Your Honor, the city cannot be held legally responsible for a resident's interpretation of an informal phone conversation." I said, "Mr. Webb, I did not ask you what the city can be held legally responsible for. I asked you whether that is what happened." He was quiet. "Yes, Your Honor, that is what happened." I turned back to Walter. "Mr. Kowalski, your cancer treatment, how is it going?" He looked slightly surprised by the question. He said, "I finished my main treatment in November, Your Honor. My doctor says the results are encouraging. I have follow-up appointments every 3 months." I said, "I am glad to hear that." He nodded once. He said, "I would like to be around for a while yet, Your Honor. I have a granddaughter. She is 4 years old." He paused. "I would like to see her grow up in that house, the way I watched her mother grow up in it." From the second row, Catherine made a sound so small it was almost nothing. She pressed her fingers to her mouth briefly, and then straightened and lifted her chin, and looked at her father's back, with the steady, fierce love of a daughter watching her father fight. The most important fight of his life. I stood up from the bench. The room changed the way it always changes. Walter looked up at me. His eyes were clear and steady, and he held my gaze without flinching. This 78-year-old man, who had painted every room of his house with his own hands and sat beside his wife until her last breath and shown up to this courtroom in his best cardigan with his shoes polished, because that is who he is and who he has always been. I said, "Mr. Webb, I am going to tell you what is going to happen today. I am dismissing the forced sale proceeding in its entirety. The ordinance under which it was filed requires that the property owner receive clear and unambiguous written notice of all accrual timelines before the lien process begins. The city's own file shows that the only direct communication with Mr. Kowalski prior to the lien was a phone call during which a municipal employee told him to call back when the work was done. That is not clear and unambiguous written notice of accrual timelines. The proceeding has no valid foundation." Webb opened his mouth. I held up one hand. "I am not finished. The outstanding balance of $1,040 is also dismissed. The original $900 fine was issued appropriately, and Mr. Kowalski has already paid that amount in full. Everything accrued beyond that $900 resulted directly from a miscommunication created by an employee of the city. Mr. Kowalski is not responsible for that miscommunication. The city is. Furthermore," I said, "I am ordering the city of Glenwood to remove the lien from Mr. Kowalski's property within 10 business days. I am ordering written confirmation of that removal to be sent directly to Mr. Kowalski at his Elmwood Street address. And I am ordering a review of the delinquent property ordinance as it applies to residents over 70 with documented medical conditions, because what I have seen in this file today should not be able to happen to anyone." Marcus Webb was writing quickly. He had stopped looking uncomfortable. He had the focused expression of a young attorney who has just watched something he will remember for a long time. Good, I thought. Remember it. I looked at Walter Kowalski. He was sitting very still with his hands flat on the table. He was looking at me and something in his face had changed. The tiredness was still there. But underneath it something else had risen, something that had been pressed down for a long time under the weight of 18 months of fighting, and it was rising now, and it was not sadness, and it was not relief exactly. It was something older and quieter than relief. It was the particular peace of a person who has been seen. I said, "Mr. Kowalski, do you have anything you would like to say?" He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Your Honor, I want to say something about Margaret." I nodded. "Go ahead." He said, "When Margaret died, the hardest part was not the grief I expected. The hardest part was understanding that the life we had built together, all the years and the work and the ordinary days that seemed small at the time but were not small at all, that all of it lived in that house, in the marks on the kitchen doorframe where we measured Catherine every birthday, in the garden Margaret planted in '97 that still comes back every spring, in the bedroom where we talked every night for 30 years before we went to sleep." His voice did not waver. He said, "When I received that forced sale notice, I sat at the kitchen table for a long time. And what I felt was not anger, though I felt that too. What I felt was that someone was trying to tell me that none of it mattered. That 41 years and a life built together, and a woman who deserved to be remembered in the place where she lived and loved and died, that all of it could be erased for $1,040. He paused. "I could not accept that, Your Honor. I could not accept that." The courtroom was absolutely silent. The older woman in the gallery had tears running down her face and was not trying to stop them. My clerk had stopped typing. Even the bailiff, a man who had stood in that room for 11 years and had seen everything there was to see, was looking at Walter Kowalski with an expression of complete attentive respect. I said, "Mr. Kowalski, no one is going to erase it. Not today. Not ever. Your home is your home. Margaret's garden will come back this spring the same as it always has. And the marks on that doorframe are still there." He looked at me for a long moment. He said, "Thank you, Your Honor." He said it simply and completely, the way a man says thank you when he means the fullest possible version of those two words. I looked at Catherine. She was sitting forward in her seat with both hands pressed together and her eyes very bright. I said, "Miss Kowalski, your father is fortunate to have you." She shook her head slightly. She said, "Your Honor, I am the one who is fortunate." Then she looked at her father's back, and she did not say anything else because there was nothing else to say. I addressed the courtroom. I want to say something clearly for the record because what has happened in this case deserves to be stated plainly. Walter Kowalski is not here because he is a bad citizen or a negligent property owner or someone who has treated his obligations with contempt. He is here because a system designed for efficiency processed him the same way it processes everyone else without stopping to ask whether efficiency and justice are the same thing. They are not always the same thing. They were not the same thing today. This man paid his mortgage for 22 years. He paid it off 19 years ago. He has owned that home outright longer than many of the people working in the municipal office that issued his citation have been alive. He has maintained that home with his own hands through 41 years and one illness and the death of his wife and the long solitary mornings of a man living alone in a house full of everything he has ever loved. He deserves better than what this process put him through, and this court is going to make sure he gets it. I picked up my gavel. Walter Kowalski, go home. Take care of that garden. Your home belongs to you. It has always belonged to you. And this court is going to make sure it stays that way. The gavel came down. Walter sat for a moment without moving. Then slowly, carefully, he gathered his folder and his cane, and he stood up. He straightened his cardigan. He turned and looked at Catherine, and she was already moving toward him. And she put her arms around him carefully, the way you hold someone when you are aware of their fragility. And he held on to her, and they stood there in the middle of my courtroom for a long moment while the room remained respectfully quiet around them. Then Walter looked up and found me still on the bench. He nodded once, a slow, deliberate nod of the kind that means more than any word available. I nodded back. That was enough. That was everything. 3 weeks later, my clerk brought me a letter. The envelope was plain white, and the handwriting was steady and deliberate. Each letter formed with the care of someone for whom good handwriting is a matter of respect for the person receiving it. It said, "Your Honor, I went home that Monday and I walked through every room. I stood in the kitchen for a long time. I went out to the back garden and I looked at Margaret's roses, still dormant in February, still waiting for spring. I stood there for a while. I want you to know that I have not stood in that garden without dreading the future since the day I received the forced sale notice. I stood there Monday afternoon, and for the first time in 18 months, I was not afraid." He had signed it Walter J. Kowalski, Elmwood Street, same address for 41 years. I put that letter in my desk drawer. It sits there now beside a child's drawing of a stegosaurus, and a note from a law student and a bookmark made with shaking hands. It sits there with all the evidence that this bench is worth the 39 years I have given it. Walter J. Kowalski came into my courtroom with a cane and a polished shoes and 41 years of a life that someone had decided was worth less than $1,040. He came in tired and clear-eyed and completely dignified, and he sat in that chair, and he told me about Margaret and the marks on the doorframe and the garden that comes back every spring, and he did not ask for sympathy. He asked for justice. That is all any of them ever ask for. Every person who walks through that door in their best clothes with their carefully organized folders and their quiet, barely contained fear. They are not asking to win. They are asking to be seen. They are asking someone in a position of authority to look at the full picture of their life and understand that it matters, that it has always mattered, that no system and no ordinance and no computerized accrual process gets to tell them otherwise. That is the job. That has always been the job. And on a Monday morning in February, a 78-year-old man with a cane and a brown cardigan and a rose garden waiting for spring reminded me of it more powerfully than anything I have experienced in 39 years on this bench. Go home, Walter. Margaret's garden is waiting. And this spring, when those roses come back, I hope you stand among them for a long time and feel everything that 41 years of a life well lived deserves to feel like. You earned it. Every single day of it. You earned it.